So think about this for a second. Have you ever had one of those weeks, like just an incredibly exhausting, soul-crushing week where you get to Friday and you feel completely drained?
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. And then you put on a specific piece of music, or maybe you sit down and watch a really beautiful film, and suddenly it's like you can breathe again. You finally feel human.
It's a very universal experience, honestly.
It is. But society usually tells us that this feeling, that art in general, is just a luxury. You know, we treat it like a garnish on the plate of life, a little
Yeah.
weekend treat, or just a way to numb your brain.
Exactly. We frame it as purely decorative.
But what if that perspective is entirely backwards? What if that specific song isn't just a way to relax, but a fundamental, non-negotiable, biological survival mechanism?
Which is a huge shift in perspective. I mean, it radically changes how we view the media we consume.
Totally.
Because if we treat art not as a decoration, but as a psychological necessity, then the people creating it aren't just entertainers. They are actually providing a critical function for human endurance.
And that is exactly the premise of our deep dive today. We are digging into the theories laid out in Chapter 8 of the philosophical text, Thus Spoke Confucius' Philosophy of Art, by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
It's such a fascinating read.
It really is. His main argument is that the sense of relief you feel when you experience profound beauty, it isn't a bonus. It's a specialized tool designed to keep humanity from collapsing under the weight of its own consciousness.
Yeah, he doesn't pull any punches with that claim.
No, he really doesn't. So today we're going to explore his mechanics of where this art actually comes from, why we desperately need it, and that notoriously blurry line between true genius and madness.
Right. And to understand how art functions as this survival tool, Al-Waily insists we first have to understand its origin point, where it actually comes from.
Okay, so where does it start?
Well, he draws a very hard line right out of the gate.
Yeah,
True art does not begin in the hands. It begins entirely and exclusively in the mind.
in the mind.
Yes. He anchors this by referencing the philosopher Benedetto Croce, who basically argued that an artist paints with their head, not their hands.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the hands, the brushes, the chisels, those are merely the delivery mechanisms for an internal vision.
Mm.
Without imagination, there's no beautiful art, no deep philosophy, no amazing architecture.
So if the genesis of art is entirely in the mind, that naturally sets up a bit of a conflict, right? Like between simply recording what's in front of you versus actually creating something new.
Exactly. And Al-Waily makes a really sharp distinction here between imitation and innovation.
Right, because let's say I spend, I don't know, 10,000 hours mastering photorealism, and I sit in front of a landscape and I perfectly replicate every single shadow, every lift, every little refraction of light on the lake.
It would look amazing.
Sure, I haven't missed a single detail of observable reality, but under his theory...
Under Al-Waily's framework, you have demonstrated immense technical skill, sure, but you haven't actually created art.
Quack.
Yeah, you are just engaging in high-level imitation. He argues that a purely observational painter is essentially acting as a biological mirror.
So it's basically like a human photocopier.
That's a great way to put it. The landscape already exists in reality. Reflecting it back doesn't add anything new to the universe.
It's just a duplicate.
Exactly. True innovation requires the artist to take that raw material of the external world and synthesize it with their internal imagination. They had to inject something into that landscape that was not there before they arrived.
That makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about modern technology. I mean, a camera can imitate reality perfectly in a fraction of a second, but it doesn't possess an internal life to project onto the image.
Exactly. But this requirement for an internal life actually leads Al-Waily to a rather controversial conclusion about personality types.
Oh, how so?
Well, he argues that because this innovation requires such a deep well of imagination, true artists must lean heavily toward introversion.
Introversion. Wait, really?
Yeah. The logic is that if your focus is entirely external, like if you are a highly social realist who is constantly engaging with the observable world, you are perfectly suited for trade, industry, business.
Right, because those fields require constant interaction with the current state of reality.
Exactly. But art demands a retreat from the external. You have to withdraw into yourself to find the silence necessary to cultivate an original vision.
I have to challenge that a bit, though, because, I mean, doesn't an artist need those external experiences to even have the raw material to work with?
Sure, they do.
If you just lock yourself in a dark room from birth, you have nothing to synthesize. So does he think highly social, extroverted people are just completely locked out of producing great art?
Well, it's less about being permanently locked out and more about the necessary conditions for the final product.
Okay,
Unpack that for me.
Al-Waily doesn't deny that artists observe the world. They absolutely collect raw data. But the alchemy of turning that data into art that cannot happen in a crowded room or during a lively debate. Oh, I see. The processing phase has to be isolated.
Right. The extroverted intake of information has to be followed by an intense introverted withdrawal. The
Hmm.
external world is just too noisy. If you're constantly reacting to your environment, you aren't leaving any bandwidth to actually hear your own imagination.
Which, provides a fascinating psychological explanation for the age-old stereotype of the isolated, eccentric, or even quote-unquote crazy artists.
Oh, definitely.
Because if the actual work of creating art requires this profound, sustained withdrawal into the self, the way that person behaves in normal society is going to look incredibly dysfunctional to the rest of us.
It inevitably looks like a social deficit to the average observer. But Al Wiley actually writes a really robust defense of this specific behavior.
What does he say?
He points out that geniuses are notoriously absent-minded.
Hmm.
They forget to eat, they ignore social conventions, they seem completely detached from the present moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Most people look at that and see madness, or at least a fundamental inability to cope with the real world. But Al Wiley offers this brilliant metaphor to reframe it. He compares the artist's imagination to clouds in the sky.
Clouds in the sky. Okay, I like that. So if I'm ignoring my friends and walking into walls, I'm just condensing clouds.
Well, basically, yes. He argues the artist's mind is filled with these floating clouds of thought, abstract ideas, emotions, visions, and they're gathering density.
Oh, wow.
And just like actual clouds, they eventually reach a saturation point where they must condense and rain down upon the real world.
And that rain is the finished art.
Exactly. So when the genius is staring blankly at a wall for 3 hours, they aren't broken or malfunctioning. They're in the active, heavy process of letting those clouds condense.
It demands a lot of grace from the people around them, honestly. But it also raises an obvious question about pathology because, let's be honest, actual madness exists.
Yes, it does.
If both the clinical madman and the artistic genius are fundamentally detached from everyday reality, how does Al Wiley draw the line between the two? From the outside, the behavior can look identical.
Right. But the distinction isn't in their behavior. It's in the underlying architecture of their minds.
Okay.
The madman is ruled by chaotic, disorganized emotion. Their detachment is a fracture. There's no system or underlying logic to their internal world.
And the genius.
The genius, conversely, is operating at the absolute peak of rationality. Their internal world is highly structured and purposeful.
It just appears illogical to the general public because, well, the public is playing by the rules of convention and the genius is playing by the rules of creation.
Exactly. Think about Al Wiley's use of Michelangelo as the prime example here.
Oh, the marble block story.
Right. Michelangelo possessed an imagination so intensely developed and structurally sound that when he looked at a massive, raw block of marble, he didn't just have a vague feeling of what he wanted to do.
He already saw it.
He vividly saw the finished, anatomically perfect sculpture trapped inside the stone, part by part, before he even picked up a tool.
See, that's the difference. A madman looking at a rock and hearing voices is experiencing chaos. Michelangelo looking at a rock and seeing the statue of David is experiencing extreme, almost mathematical order. He's projecting a hyper-organized internal vision onto external reality.
Beautifully said, and that level of vision doesn't just float on the surface of your everyday thoughts. To explain where Michelangelo's David actually comes from, Al Wiley relies on a mathematical breakdown of the mind.
Is this the 1/8 and 7/8 rule?
Yes, exactly. Your listeners will likely recognize it as the classic iceberg model of the mind, but he applies it strictly as a metric for artistic value.
Right, so just to recap for you listening, the 1/8 is our conscious mind, the observable reality, the surface level of daily life, and the remaining 7/8 is the massive submerged subconscious.
Right, but rather than just using it as a psychological model, he uses it to judge the depth of art. Well, an artist who only paints the observable world, that pure imitator we talked about earlier, they are only interacting with the 1/8.
They're just skating on the surface of the ice.
Exactly. The most original immortal art, the kind that survives for centuries and transcends language, is mined entirely from the freezing depths of that submerged 7/8.
But, I mean, minding the subconscious isn't a passive activity. You can't just sit on the couch and wait for the 7/8 to politely deliver a masterpiece to your conscious mind.
No, not at all.
Al-Waily describes this as agonizing work. What does that mechanical process actually look like? How do you tap into that massive chunk of ice without just drifting away into permanent daydreams?
It requires an active, often painful wrestling match with the self. Tapping into the subconscious means intentionally stripping away the comfortable distractions of the 1/8.
So no doom scrolling on your phone.
Definitely no doom scrolling. It requires sincere effort, deliberate practice, and forcing yourself to confront internal contradictions, fears, and profound emotions without the buffer of everyday small talk or routine.
Man, that sounds exhausting.
It is exhausting labor. You have to dive into the dark, find a cohesive vision, and drag it up to the surface intact.
Okay, so we have these introverted geniuses isolating themselves, doing this agonizing work of plunging into their subconscious while their clouds condense. They are sacrificing their normal social lives to do this.
Yes, they are.
The ultimate question is why? Why is this necessary? What is the practical utility of all this solitary suffering for the rest of society?
The utility addresses a really unique and, frankly, tragic flaw in human biology.
Oh.
Al-Waily argues that human beings are hypersensitive creatures burdened with endless, unachievable desires.
Wow, that's dark, but accurate.
We are fundamentally wired to imagine a better scenario than the one we are currently in. And because our finite reality can never satisfy our infinite desires, the natural default state of the human mind is deep psychological exhaustion and pessimism.
We are literally structurally engineered for dissatisfaction. If left to our own devices, reality is just a slow grind of unmet expectations.
Exactly. He goes so far as to describe human life without art as a dark prison.
A dark prison. Wow.
In this framework, art is not a decoration. It is the salt of life. It is the specific, necessary ingredient that makes a bitter, exhausting existence palatable enough to endure.
Okay, let's apply that to you, the listener. Think about the media you consume. When you finally clock out on a Friday, after dealing with impossible deadlines, traffic, endless demands, and you put on your favorite album or watch a breathtaking piece of cinema, you aren't just chilling out.
No, you aren't.
According to Al-Waily, you are administering a psychological painkiller.
Yes. And he categorizes this painkiller into two distinct mercies.
What are they?
There is natural art, which he views as God's mercy, the overwhelming scale of the stars, the rhythm of the vast seas, the colors of twilight.
And the second?
The second is artificial art, which is humanity's mercy to itself. Our music, our painting, our poetry, our architecture.
So natural beauty and human-made beauty.
Exactly. And both of these mercies operate using the exact same psychological mechanism, which he calls aesthetic shock, or amazement.
Aesthetic shock. How does that physically work in the brain? Like, what is the shock doing?
When you encounter true 7/8 beauty, it is so potent that it forces a sudden system override.
An override?
Yeah, the human mind simply cannot hold on to the mundane anxieties of the 1/8 while simultaneously processing profound aesthetic amazement. The beauty shocks the system, completely derailing your anxiety loop.
It forces you to drop your existential baggage, even if just for 3 minutes during a really good song.
Exactly. And that brief period of forced forgetfulness is a pressure valve. It gives the exhausted human spirit the momentary rest it needs to gather strength, re-enter the prison of daily life, and keep functioning.
Because without that shock, the pressure just builds until society collapses into despair.
Precisely.
But framing art as a functional painkiller brings us right to the doorstep of a massive philosophical debate. It's an argument that critics and artists have been having for centuries.
Ah, yes. The classic clash.
Right, the clash between art for art's sake versus art for life. If art is a survival tool, does it have to deliver a practical, utilitarian message to be valuable? Or is just being pretty enough?
It's a great question, and Al-Waily resolves this centuries-old conflict beautifully by pointing out that it's a false dichotomy.
A false dichotomy? How so?
He argues that both camps are ultimately serving life and human survival. They just take different routes.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, art for life is direct. It's art with an agenda. Think of a patriotic poem designed to rouse citizens to defend their city, or a devastating novel that exposes a social injustice, like poverty.
Right. It has a clear, observable utility in the 1/8 reality. It teaches a moral lesson or incites political action.
Exactly.
But what about the other side? What about a perfectly composed instrumental song or a painting of a bowl of fruit that has absolutely zero political or social message?
That is art for art's sake, and Al-Waily argues it is equally vital.
Because of the shock?
Yes, because of the aesthetic shock mechanism we just discussed. The mere creation of beauty heals the spirit. By providing that shock, it keeps the individual functioning.
And if you keep the individuals functioning, you keep the society functioning.
Exactly. Therefore, purely aesthetic art is highly utilitarian. Fighting over which type of art is better is completely missing the point. Both keep the human race alive.
Is there any art, then, that Al-Waily would consider invalid or useless? Because if the definition is this broad, it sounds like anything goes.
He does draw one firm line.
Where's the line?
The only invalid art is immoral or destructive art. Art that glorifies cruelty, promotes crime, or degrades human dignity.
So art that does harm.
Right. He argues that this kind of art carries the seeds of its own destruction. Even if it is technically masterful, even if the shading and prose are perfect, the ugliness of its core message will ultimately outweigh the aesthetic beauty.
Meaning it fails to provide the healing shock humanity needs.
Exactly. It breaks the mechanism.
What's fascinating to me is how far he extends this requirement for beauty. If this aesthetic shock is our medicine, Al-Waily argues it shouldn't just be locked away in elite galleries or museums.
Oh, absolutely not.
He says this vital beauty needs to be woven into the fabric of everyday life. It should be in our public buildings, the design of our clothes, the craftsmanship of our furniture, and even in our morals.
We should be constantly surrounded by the 7/8 to soften the inherent cruelty of existence.
Right, that integration is his ultimate definition of a successful civilization. But for this everywhere beauty to actually function as medicine, it has a strict requirement.
A very strict one. Sincerity.
Yes, the environment must demand total sincerity from the artist. You cannot mass produce the 7/8 and you cannot fake it.
Sincerity is a huge pillar for him. He states plainly, art does not obey those who are not sincere to it.
And he uses some pretty stark examples for this, right?
Very stark. He argues that someone who has never truly experienced love cannot write a convincing love poem. And, perhaps more controversially, he argues that an atheist cannot paint a true masterpiece of Jesus.
Okay, I have to push back hard on that last point. I struggle with his strict rule on sincerity here.
I figured you might.
What if an atheist is simply a profound master of human empathy? Can't a brilliant secular artist simulate the religious awe needed just by tapping into a universal human feeling of reverence or historical gravitas? I mean, sheer technical skill combined with empathy has to be enough, right?
It's a compelling counter-argument, for sure. But within Al-Waily's framework, simulated reverence is still just a 1/8 level skill.
Holy, just the 1/8.
Yeah. It is a brilliant mimicry of emotion, not the emotion itself. Remember, true immortal art requires the artist to plunge into their own subconscious to retrieve the vision.
Right, the agonizing work.
If the artist does not possess a genuine foundational belief in the subject, there is nothing in their 7/8 to retrieve. They are just arranging paint on the surface.
So they might create a technically beautiful image, but
it will lack the soul required to deliver a true aesthetic shock across generations. Art will simply not obey them.
wow. So if an artist creates something solely because they know it will sell, like pandering to market trends or trying to manufacture a viral hit without actually believing in the core message, they are mathematically doomed to produce shallow work.
Exactly. Immortal fame, the kind that lasts centuries, only comes from enduring the agonizing effort of doing art with absolute uncompromising sincerity.
Which naturally leads to another major enemy of true art in Al-Waily's eyes: repetition.
Yes, repetition is deadly to art.
Repetition, like an artist repeating their own success. Or what do you mean?
Or a society mass-producing a design. He frames this almost like an economic principle of diminishing returns.
Okay, walk me through that.
Imagine a brilliant architect designs a completely original, breathtaking tower. Seeing it for the first time delivers a massive aesthetic shock because it represents a raw, massive effort of imagination.
The clouds condensed perfectly.
Exactly. But if a developer takes those blueprints and builds 50 identical copies of that tower in the same city, the copies fail to produce the shock.
Because the viewer's mind recognizes that no new effort of imagination was expended.
Right. The copies are just manual labor. They are human photocopies.
Which brings us to his grand equation for a functioning society. Al-Waily argues that civilization equals culture plus imagination plus effort.
Culture plus imagination plus effort. That is the formula.
But let's look at the reality of that formula for a second. Effort, imagination, and the agonizing work of mining the subconscious require a massive amount of time and silence.
They do.
Which brings up a very practical, real-world problem.
Yeah.
If we desperately need these introverted geniuses to produce the 7/8 art that acts as our societal painkiller, how do they buy groceries?
The eternal question.
Right. Who pays the rent while they're staring at the wall waiting for the clouds to condense?
This is where Al-Waily addresses the economics of patronage. Historically, the existence of patrons was absolutely critical to human survival.
So the wealthy merchants, the priests, the nobility.
Exactly. The people who funded figures like Da Vinci, Raphael, and Michelangelo, they weren't just buying pretty things. They were providing the crucial economic scaffolding that allowed these introverted geniuses the physical safety and the silence required to retreat into themselves and mine the iceberg.
They bought the artist time so the artist could buy society its sanity.
Precisely. And Al-Waily makes sure to point out that this patronage isn't just altruistic charity. On a macroeconomic level, nations benefit wildly from funding the 7/8.
How so? Like tourism.
Absolutely. The great art produced by supported geniuses attracts global tourism, immense wealth, and cultural prestige that lasts for centuries long after the patron is gone. An investment in the unobservable subconscious pays massive, tangible dividends in the observable reality.
Okay, let's synthesize all of this. If you are listening to this on your commute or while you're working, look around at the architecture of your city, the design of your clothes, or the music in your headphones.
None of it is accidental.
Right. According to Al-Waily, none of that is mere decoration. It is a profound, hard-won synthesis of introverted imagination. It's the result of someone isolating themselves, doing the agonizing work of diving into the hidden 7/8 of their mind and dragging a vision to the surface.
And it exists specifically to be the salt of life, the psychological medicine that makes human hardship bearable.
Which leaves us with a critical and, honestly, a somewhat unsettling question to consider about our current era.
It really does. Because if true, immortal art absolutely requires deep introversion, a disconnection from external noise, and the silence to tap into the hidden depths of the mind.
What happens to our collective mental health in a hyper-connected, relentlessly extroverted modern world?
That's the terrifying part. If our phones and screens never allow us a single moment of true silence, when do we ever allow the clouds of imagination to condense?
And if the clouds never condense,
Yeah,
we eventually lose our civilization's access to the medicine.
we lose the shock that keeps us going.
That is a profound thought to take with you today. If we lose the silence, do we lose the medicine? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us into the philosophy of Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily. We hope it gives you a completely new appreciation the next time a piece of music or a great movie saves your sanity at the end of a long week.
Keep looking for that 7/8 in the art around you.
Until next time.